welcome back. Happy Friday. Concepts and training, diving into shoulder mobility. So just main two things when we think about shoulder mobility is when we look at the shoulder, we have to consider the fact that our scapula, so our shoulder blade, moves across the rib cage, and then we have to think about our humerus moving with inside kind of that glenohumeral joint that is out here. So making sure that when we look at focusing on shoulder mobility, because I think a lot of times everybody goes through the same drills, they distract the shoulder. What we're looking at, especially when we look at mobility, is what is the humerus doing within that joint, with the shoulder blade and the your clavicle, so your shoulder or collarbone, being able to understand how it's interacting. Then also, what's the relation of your scapula to your rib cage? When we look at it, all right, if this is your rib cage, your scapula sits and slides along the back side. So two things to consider, right? So if we were to look at different shoulder mobility techniques, what we're trying to understand is, are we targeting scapular mobility, or are we actually targeting humeral rotation, right? So when we look at internal and external rotation of the shoulder, and then we look at flexion extension. So, we have internal rotation of the humerus, external rotation of the humerus, shoulder flexion, shoulder extension, or really humeral flexion, humeral extension, okay? Then we have adduction and abduction. There's a lot of things that are going on there. Really what it comes down to is starting to target what, and being specific about what you're trying to target, okay? If you are trying to target scapular mobility, what we're trying to actually do is lock that rib cage into place and then move that shoulder blade around a fixed rib cage, right? So let's just say I am putting a PVC pipe over my head, and we'll just turn around here, never turn back to the camera. It's like classic rule of theater, right? But we're gonna fix the rib cage and then try to slide those shoulder blades up and down, right? So the more shoulder mobility, the more scapular mobility that we have, the more we're gonna have control over that range in terms of position of the shoulder blade or the scapula on the rib cage, all right? So when we start to look at that, we're trying to fix the rib cage, relation to that scapula. So if I create, some compression and compress the rib cage, all of a sudden now I've got the ability to, expand posteriorly and then trying to move a shoulder blade around a fixed rib. And then when we start to look at the humerus itself and trying to look at shoulder mobility from a humeral perspective, we're trying to lock the shoulder blade into place, right? So great example, I call this a Star Wars stretch, but being able to sit there and put a shoulder blade, so I'm gonna lock my shoulder blade forward into scapular protraction, but then I'm just gonna take that PVC pipe and I'm gonna rotate out. Well, what we're really doing is creating rotation, flexion, extension, whatever it is, trying to create it around a fixed scapular position, all right? Because when we start to look at it, we need to have all those different things in place, right? So if I look at full shoulder mobility, well, in this just circle, right, if we're trying to look at mobility as the ability to hit end ranges, it's gonna be influenced by how I can control and how mobile the scapula is compared to the rib cage, and how mobile the humerus is in relation to the scapula itself. So being able to understand when we're targeting mobility, think about before you do them, are you trying to target humeral mobility in relation to the sternoclavicular joint, and not sternoclavicular joint, the glenohumeral joint, and then or are you trying to target scapular mobility in relation to the rib cage? So kind of like we have with our hip, we had a fixed femur position or a fixed pelvic position. When we look at the shoulder, we're trying to really identify, are we looking at a fixed rib cage position, or are we looking at a fixed scapular position? That way we know what we're really targeting. So there's a brief overview of shoulder mobility and some considerations for that for next week's Concepts and Training.